skunk repelling everything I find. Searching, not finding any shred of peace of mind. Is it courage to boldly admit to all I lack? Imagine Phantom Father is never coming back.
I don't know about that Phantom Father coming back, but I will not be admitting to what I lack on this show. You can call me at 831-459-4036 is the way to end that number. You can tell me what I'm lacking on the show if you would like to, live on the air, as long as we use kid-approved language. Just a quick reminder here on Unquestionable, which is the show you are listening to. I'm Dan Wu. This is the last day to register to vote in the 2018 general election. Monday, October 22nd is today. Voter registration forms are online at registertovote.ca.gov. That's REGISTERTO vote.california.gov. Paper versions are also available. California vote by mail applications must arrive by October 30th. These applications can be requested online. And I have a guest in the studio this week, which is a little different than what I've been doing the last few weeks. I've just been talking with you, the listeners, about various specific state propositions, city and county measures. But today I have someone I ran into at the No Place Like Home event last week at the Civic Auditorium in Santa Cruz. I have Mr. Drew Glover, second or third time city council candidate, Drew?
Second. This is the second time around. Ran in 2016 and came within 1% of winning. Over 10,000 people voted for me that time, but I came with about 500 votes, and that was because I had to leave the city for the last 3 weeks of the election because my mom got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. So I spent the last 3 weeks in Washington State with her in the hospital until she passed, and then taking care of her stuff and coming back home. So it was a great experience in 2016. A great message just sent out about the readiness for change within the large population of Santa Cruz. And now back at it 2018 with a radical new strategy and some really great things to advocate for.
Now, I want to remind, just so this is not misunderstood at all, that you can contact me here at the station if you're a candidate or you're represented a candidate, and you can be on this show in the next 3 weeks. I just want to pound that in. We put that on our government regulated station paperwork as well, that Drew's a candidate for city office. That's an invitation to anyone else to come on, because we here hold ourselves to the fairness doctrine, which does not exist anymore at the government level, about giving fair time. But even without the fairness doctrine of sharing different opinions, you still do have to offer time to other candidates. I just want to make that clear. I ran into Drew. I asked him if he wanted to be on the show. And yeah, so you said a radical new strategy and things to advocate for. Also, special prize, not sure what it is yet, to anyone who can name the amount of times that I say the word "and" unnecessarily on the show.
It's better than
It's horrible. But tell me about this radical new strategy, then maybe the top two things that you're advocating for, because I bet I could guess the top one.
Well, so the radical new strategy, we came together in May and had a brainstorm, and we had decided...
Who's we?
The organizing team, the people that had been help steering the campaign. We started the process late last year, just kind of with the conversations around city council races and approaches and strategies, and started fundraising rather early on. So when we got to May or so, we had raised about $9,000 or $10,000, and we decided that instead of focusing all of our time and energy on fundraising, which is the traditional way of running a campaign, you make a bunch of phone calls, you raise a bunch of money, and then you use that money to buy people's attention, essentially, for lack of a better word, through mailers and glossy flyers and all these other kinds of things. Because looking at the previous year's campaign, we had spent $15,000 out of the $22,000 that we had raised on printing and postage costs. So that's mailers and flyers and posters and all these other kinds of disposable things. And for those of you out there that already know me, or even those of you that don't, I'm the executive director of Project Pollinate, and we focus on environmental sustainability. So we asked ourselves, do we want to play by the same kind of game where we're not only, while we're out there talking about sustainability and wanting to be better, but at the same time actively putting lots of waste into the environment and spending money rather irresponsibly just to buy people's attention. So instead, we decided to take the alternate route, which was to focus on getting money out of politics and building stronger relationships throughout the community. So we stopped soliciting contributions. So normally when a politician stops talking to you at an event, they're like, hey, you want to give me some money? So instead we moved away from that and encouraged people to activate and get involved more physically. So that took the forms of walking neighborhoods, sharing digital media online, coming and helping with different things. And it's been fantastic with the results that we've gotten with people and their energy around it. And even, some people feel like they have to give money. So it's been interesting trying to kind of convince people not to give money and figure out different ways they can support. And it's been great. And it's been a good feeling not having all of the different pieces of paper flying around. And people really appreciate it when I come to their door and I say, hey, instead of me giving you a flyer, take a picture of this one sheet with your phone and then you can share it with your friends. And people respond really positively to that.
Now, that's an interesting question because I was wondering, I've known you since junior high, and I was wondering, why are there no signs up for you? My neighbor, in fact, has a sign up for you in their yard, and across the street on Bay, there's one. But in comparison to most other candidates, you don't have a lot of yard sign action. How much of a concern is that for you?
Not very much at all. In fact, we have over 150 yard signs out and around in the community, which is comparable to at least some of the other candidates that have done about 200. The thing with the yard signs was that we decided, just like with the other parts of the strategy, to take a new approach. So instead of buying new yard signs and putting those 200 new pieces of plastic into the environment, what we did was we figured out a way to repurpose old yard signs from previous candidates that had run in June, I guess, for these the June elections. And so a lot of people told us it wasn't going to be possible. A lot of people just told us, hey, why don't you just raise money and buy new ones? But the signs that you see out there went through a design process that was solution-oriented thinking, as well as creative problem solving. And we figured out a way not only to repurpose the signs, but to do it in a way that uses the least toxic paint that's available, which is nursery and hospital grade. And it made it so we didn't have to add new plastic into the community, not to mention that it comes out to cost about half as much as if we had bought new signs, and it was a great community building opportunity. So when you asked what the two main things that I am advocating for, amongst all of the other things that I talk about, the first one is renters protections and rent stabilization, which I'm sure we'll talk about with Measure M, because I'm one of two candidates that has come out in support of Measure M. And then the other is the management of the budget. A lot of people talk about all these different sound bites of sustainability, transportation, housing, but it all roots back to the budget. And I work at the Resource Center for Nonviolence and train in the philosophy of Dr. Martin Luther King. And one of the quotes I always turn to when we talk about local politics is, a budget is a moral document. And so we can really tell about the emphasis or the priorities that the city has based off of where we put our money. And after analyzing the budget, I've come to the conclusion that the values represented in our budget do not represent the values I know Santa Cruz to hold.
So reforming the way that we put together and manage our budgets and Measure M are the top two that you would say you're advocating for. And you said that one other candidate is out publicly in favor of Measure M. Would you like to name that other candidate?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, the other candidate who has also been very publicly supportive of Measure M is Justin Cummings. And we're the only two candidates so far, to my knowledge, that have cross-endorsed each other. It's all about the conversation about equity and justice, and especially with the ties that we have to community and environment. We're very much in line with what we want to see. And it's great because we're two very different people, but we bring such complementary perspectives and energy into the conversation, and I think into the city council when we're elected in November.
And it says that there are 3 needed votes for the city council. In your perfect world, who would be the third person that would join the city council with you out of this list of about 11 candidates?
Yeah, I think it's 10 or 11. Yeah.
There's a fold in it. I think it's 11.
strategy that we're suggesting for people is what's called bullet voting. So while people are allowed to vote for up to 3 people, we're encouraging people that support rent stabilization, support renters protection, support community representation in local government to only vote for 2. And that would be for myself and Justin Cummings. The logic behind that is we want people to focus their votes in, since we are the 2 social justice candidates, right? We are the ones that are going to be out there fighting for people in underserved communities. We're going to be there fighting both in the corner of renters, but also in bringing people together with a small-time landlords so we can reunify the community after it's been so divided and polarized from the conversations around rent control and Measure M. And so if everyone just votes for the 2 of us, then it stops from diluting the pool and removes the possibility of us getting pushed off if they vote for someone else who has come out publicly against Measure M, and then all of the no on M people vote for that same person. It could push us out of the race. So we want people to vote for, or I should say I, since I speak for myself, I would encourage people to vote for Justin, myself.
Now, there's been a slew of mailers, on the other hand, against most of the things you're standing for, including other issues, which I don't want to confuse the whole conversation right off the bat. But I had a good talk I have a talk with my friend frequently who just became a homeowner last year, and he does have a renter. And they were able to buy their house from their landlord. It was actually a really good situation.
Nice.
And it wasn't like a sweetheart deal, but I'm sure they paid less than they would have otherwise. But he's still struggling to make his mortgage, and that renter makes it possible. And a lot of the mailers and a lot of the words out there have scared him. He said, I really feel like rents are out of control and something needs to be done, as a lot of people say.
Right.
But he doesn't want to give up any of his rights as an owner. And I really encouraged him to read up on it. I was like, I didn't say, yes, vote for Measure M. I'm not like trying to strong arm my friend. And I understand he has 2 kids. He works for NHS. He doesn't make a ton of money doing that. You know, his wife works for the university, and they have serious concerns about it. And what would you say to someone who owns their home and rents part of the home to someone, whether it's a unit in the backyard or it's the upstairs bedroom, as far as the impact of Measure M on them, who really, really do feel the pain of renters because they were a renter their entire life up until last year, but are scared from a lot of the words being thrown around about Measure M?
Well, if they're scared from the words being thrown around, then the propaganda machine has done its job. Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that's come out in mailers and claims made by the opposition against Measure M are not statistically or factually sound in being able to be proven to be true. And that was illustrated very well by the No Place Like Home event with Steve McKay and all of the wonderful researchers and student grad participants that took place in that study. And also it really depends on where they're coming from with as far as the renter goes, because if the renter lives in the same house with them and they share a kitchen, then the provisions of Measure M don't apply to that landlord.
Wait, what if it's a unit in the backyard, but they share a kitchen and maybe a bathroom with a shower or a bathtub or something? To my understanding with Measure M, that if you share a kitchen with the landlord, then it doesn't apply. It's only if you have your own separate space with your own separate kitchen and bathroom for that to be applicable. And the short answer of what I would say to your friend or someone else in their position is that Measure M is just the right thing to do. I was in a conversation with the president of the NAACP locally, and I asked them why they had come out in support of Measure M, and she responded just as bluntly as that, because it's the right thing to do. Didn't the California NAACP come out against a lot of these provisions, though? So the NAACP state chapter came out against Prop 10, which deviates from the California State Democratic Party platform, which supports Prop 10. Interesting. And okay, so that brings me to my next question, which is, why am I getting such a fierce echo here? Anyways, maybe you're not hearing that? No echo on my end. Awesome. Hopefully the listeners aren't hearing that. Maybe it's just my brain. But
Donate, right? Donate.
I've been saying this for a little while now, and I'm glad that everything has been peaceful, obviously, because, I mean, anyone that knows me, I'm not one for a physical conflict. But I'm really happy about this whole... Everyone's trying to say that, we should all get along, and they're kind of co-opting hippie speech, I think, to sometimes shut down conversations. I could not be more happy that everyone is seriously arguing in Santa Cruz about policy that runs our lives and fighting in California with each other about policies that control our daily lives for the first time, I think, in our lifetimes, where we have been told that this is this liberal, civil rights loving place and it's wonderful, and everyone, just as long as we vote against the Republican Party and California's blue, then everything's fine. And there's these splits that we have not talked about until the point where 30 or 40% of people run out of town and run out of every town in Western California, essentially, over the our lifetime since we were little kids. And now people are having serious debates about issues. And one of your other candidates that's running said, and I don't know. I won't use their name because I don't know if they want me to, but they basically said about the rent control idea is that we need to stop the game of divisively proposing ideas and then figuring out whose is best. We need to just come together. And it seemed like a co-opting of hippie speech from the 60s for capitalist purposes, because of the fact that basically what they're saying is we shouldn't be proposing ideas and figuring out which is the best one. We should just stop talking about it. And honestly, that just seems like a way of just saying we shouldn't talk about it rather than coming up with any solutions. And it might be hyperbolic, but it seems like the bully saying, you know what, we shouldn't figure out who has a black eye, like we should just move on and just get along.
It's very reminiscent of a thread on my Facebook page recently where we put up a post about Prop 10 and how there are racial justice aspects to rent control, especially allowing municipalities to control rent control in their own areas, which is what Prop 10 is basically about, which is repealing Costa-Hawkins. But there was a person who identifies as white that came on to the thread and said, why do you got to make everything about race? And so it opens up that continuous conversation of, are we supposed to just not be talking about the issues because it makes people uncomfortable? And if it makes you uncomfortable, why is it that you're afraid to talk about the issues? And why is it so hard to see the connection between inequality over here and systemic and socioeconomic inequality that's existed forever in our country, unfortunately? But with Measure M and the claims against it, like I mentioned before, a lot of them are unfounded. And even at the No Place Like Home event, there was a union representative up on stage that mentioned the similarities between the arguments against rent control and the arguments against labor organizing, and how they're very, very similar. Of if we enact rent control, then people aren't going to rent anymore and we're going to lose rental units, where the argument against labor is that if we enact a living wage, then people are going to lose their jobs and there's not going to be many jobs available, when that's been proven not to be true. I
think that's a very interesting point. Is in classic economics of the last 100 years, people have said minimum wage laws cut the number of employees, the same as rent control cuts the number of available rentals, and the minimum wage thing hasn't played out. But at the same time, there are many price controls that exist in our environment. I've had 2 shows on Prop 13, which protects the property tax increases of property owners, whether it's their home, their retail store, or one of hundreds of rentals they own. And it caps their increases in property tax at 2% a year, which one article I just read recently very succinctly said is stricter than any rent control ordinance on the books, and landlords benefit from that.
Right.
To the point where even businesses can't buy the building. If they're going to have a restaurant that they run for 30 years, they usually can't even buy that building, and they're at the whim of a landlord as well. And so it's interesting that price controls are being demonized now when it's renters, but about 64% of people own their home in the U.S., according to current stats. And in 1965, I think, it was 62%. My point being is that a lot of people say, well, people will transition to owning a home, and only about 40% of people own their homes in Santa Cruz. Mm-hmm. And the point being is that a lot of these landlords that are fighting against rent control say, well, renters are temporary status and they're not really going to be here forever. But the stats show that about 40% of people, and in this community, about 58% of people can never own their own home. So are we treating them like guest workers and saying at some point you're going to be priced out and that's just inevitable? Or are we going to accept, or would you propose a different solution to that type of thinking?
So I always propose a different solution to that type of thinking, because that's not only exclusive, but it makes it so that there is a severe loss of diversity, especially of the different socioeconomic levels in a community, which have to do with service workers, teachers, janitors, sanitation workers, like all of the service workers and people that keep our community moving forward. And what make the community special are the ones that are getting pushed out and driven out of the area. And, a lot of the arguments that you hear against Measure M is that it's too extreme and there needs to be more of a moderate approach, and that people support rent control, but they don't support this rent control, and we need to figure out a different rent control, or it shouldn't be implemented by the city council, or it shouldn't be implemented by a ballot vote, because then it changes the city charter as opposed to the city council making it an amendment or an ordinance. So there's so many things that go into that, because starting with the ordinance, if the city council ordinance goes into effect, then the next city council, literally 2 years later, if the makeup of the city council changes, can change that ordinance again.
But also in defense of Measure M, a lot of people say that it's Mark Primack, a former city council member on this show, so on a different show that I was guest hosting, my apologies, to talk about, said that he wants to see it as a city council initiative that they put forward and not a city charter amendment, because then it's somehow set in stone. Mm-hmm. But in 2 years, the voters could just vote to amend it. It's an amendment. It literally says it in the word that it can be changed. So if we vote for this, I know a lot of people older than me that I was surprised that we're saying this. We're saying we need to vote for this and then change it later if it needs to be changed. But the point of it is that the city council, I don't think, is ever going to take up something like this. So that's why it's gotten to the point of voters putting forward this initiative. Would you agree with that, and have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. The reason we are where we are today is because of the lack of leadership of the city council and the city councils previous to it over the last 20 or 30 years in Santa Cruz, since the rent control conversation happened before, like you mentioned, basically the beginning
40 years ago, actually.
Beginning of our lifetime, or right before our lifetime. And if they had shown that they were able to be proactive, if they had acted as moderators to bring people together, then we might not be in the situation. But like we were just talking about, the difference between an ordinance and a charter amendment, which is done through the vote of the people, it's one of the things I always respond to people when they say, oh, well, I don't want this one because it has problems with it. If we pass this now and over the next 2 years come together with conflict reconciliation between small-time landlords and renters and have a conversation about what truly won't work in Santa Cruz after we look at the impact of the implementation of the currently written Measure M, then we can come back together in 2020 after having the community-based conversations and with a unified voice and a 2/3 vote, make those changes. The argument against it is that it's going to be too hard if we pass it now and then want to run it again, and too expensive, which seems to be one of their favorite taglines. But the only reason why it's expensive and or divisive is because there hasn't been the ability for people to come together and reconcile the differences and agree on how to move forward together, which is essential in any kind of policy development.
And also, this is not my opinion. The too expensive tagline on that is completely speculative, and I want to put that out into the air, is that it actually has no price tag. I believe in Santa Monica or Richmond, one of the two is Richmond is a volunteer position for the rent board, and also the first rent board will be appointed by the city council, and I don't think they're going to reanimate the corpse of Che Guevara and put him on the rent board. So I don't think that people need to fear. I bet the city council is going to put some business-friendly people on the rent board, and they will be human beings that take appeals and make decisions. We will be back with Drew Glover to talk about other things that make up him as a human being and a candidate in just a moment after a couple of announcements. You're listening to Unquestionable on KZSE Santa Cruz. I'm Dan Wu. This is To Make Say Think with 1978, and earlier we had my other wonderfully gifted theme music, Mirrors, by the Santa Cruz band Homebrew. I'll be back with a bunch of questions about my ballot in front of me. We will get off the Measure M conversation, and we'll see what else comes up. Listening to Unquestionable. KZSE's Voces Criticas, or Critical Voices, offers a fresh take on what's happening in the world today with interviews and critical commentaries about global affairs that seek to challenge the status quo. And I'm putting you on mute right now, caller, just so you don't get disconnected. You are on. I'll get you in a minute here after the announcement if you want to hang out. They offer a fresh take on what's happening in the world today with interviews and critical commentaries about global affairs that seek to challenge the status quo. Listen to Voces Criticas, Critical Voices, every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. on KZSE 88.1 FM and online at kzse.org. The show highlights voices that are too often left out of the mainstream conversations. Listen and be inspired Thursday at 5:30 p.m. And you know what? I'm going to give them some background music. You're on KZSE Santa Cruz with Unquestionable. How's it going?
Hey, how's it going?
All right. What's up?
We're down here in Monterey. I mean, I know you're up in Santa Cruz, but we're having a really big fight over Measure J down here.
I'm actually going to cover that next week. I was going to cover that this week, and then I ran into a guest. But go ahead. Go ahead, man.
Yeah, that's awesome. I just want to make everyone aware that we've had Cal-Am down here for 50 years, and we formed our own water, the district, the Monterey Peninsula Water District, that was supposed to take them over a long time ago. And so they've gotten pretty comfortable, being our water source. And, due to mismanagement and a number of other things, people are really upset at Cal-Am. And the way that they've been running our water system. And, now we have the highest water bills in the country down here in Monterey. So just wanted to share that with you and make people aware that Cal-Am's spending millions and millions of dollars to fight us on this.
So Measure J is a yes vote to turn it over to the Monterey Peninsula Water that you're forming, correct?
Yeah, Monterey Peninsula Water District's already been around for a while. They assist Cal-Am, and they've actually come up with some new water sources, and we started a new recycling Monterey 1, which could supply the peninsula with a lot of water. But what Cal-Am's trying to do is build a desal plant in Marina and trap us with that. Because as soon as they build it, it's $300 million, and
right.
They're going to own that desal plant. And basically, we'll be we will not be able to get rid of them as easy.
All right. So, thank you so much for the call, man. And I will be talking about that in the next 2 weeks. I got 2 shows. Let's see here. October 28th and then November 5th, I'll be on the air and hopefully be covering Measure J for at least half a show. Thank you so much for the call. Thanks for listening. Yeah. And yeah, I do feel like I sometimes do a disservice, and that KZSE in general does a disservice to Monterey and San Benito County. And I'm trying to branch my intellectual tentacles out into those issues because our signal gets a lot of listenership from down there. And I feel like we should give that more coverage. That's why I try to cover some state issues. I do have Drew Glover, city council candidate for Santa Cruz, in the studio right now. And I got a couple questions for him, maybe a little more lightning. I got my ballot in front of me. So, Drew, John Cox or Gavin Newsom?
Regrettably, Gavin Newsom.
All right. The Hillary Clinton situation.
Yeah, it's like go with a Republican that wants to repeal the gas tax or go with Gavin Newsom. So,
Okay.
Gavin
Going
Newsom.
with the capitalist Democrat.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And what else should we ask? Prop 6.
No.
No?
Prop 6.
What is Prop 6?
Prop 6 is the repeal of the gas tax, which is a just ridiculous suggestion because there's no other suggestions on where that revenue is going to come from to be able to support our transportation systems. Not to mention it's a regressive tax, so I'm usually against regressive taxes because they disproportionately impact lower income people. But at the same time, if we can generate revenue to fix our broken infrastructure in the state and ideally dissuade people from using single passenger vehicles and figuring out other ways to get around, we can protect the environment.
I would almost call it a pregressive tax.
Pregressive,
because it does impact people on the lower income scale, but it also heavily impacts, or more heavily impacts in the dollar amount, people that use large amounts of fuel, which are the big corporate players.
Right.
So I don't know. I would say it affects both people and both groups of people. And I actually agree with the gas tax increase. I heard a robocall saying that Prop 6 was mislabeled on my ballot and that my county registrar had made a mistake. There's a robocall going out about that, saying that it should just say the words gas tax repeal instead of what it does say, eliminates certain road repair and transportation funding, requires certain fuel taxes and vehicle fees be approved by the electorate initiative constitutional amendment. What would you say about that title? Do you feel like that title of eliminate certain road repair and transportation funding is accurate, or do you think that that should have been changed?
I have a lot of problems with the way that ballots are titled in general. You know, it's really consistent across the board. I'm sure it's not just Prop 6 with the weird misleading titles. That's why it's so important for people to do their research and not just go on the description or ballot statements that are listed in their literature, but to actually go and research the ballots or the propositions and measures on places like Ballotpedia that really break it down, show you who's supporting them, who's not supporting them, the arguments for and against them, and then, you know, really dig deep because it's important. I know that people have a lot of stuff going on in their lives, but these kinds of moments are essential to be aware of what you're voting for.
Measure H, Santa Cruz County Initiative.
Measure H, I'm a yes on H.
How would you describe H?
H is to generate around $140 million in affordable housing funding. So
over 30 years.
Over
yes.
30 years, yeah. It's a bond so it's going to impact property taxes. I think it's $12 for every $100,000. $16 for every $100,000 of property value. So it's nice that homeowners are going to be subsidizing and or supporting the development of affordable housing in the local area. There's, of course, problems with the way it's written because there's no specification on how where, when, all these other kinds of stuff with the money. But it's put together by a group of good housing advocates that have a genuine interest in making Santa Cruz a livable place. So I'm a yes on H.
All right. Prop 10, you said you're a yes on. Prop 8's one that's getting a lot of press. What do you know about Prop 8? I've been thinking hard about it. I have an opinion on it. But what do you feel about Prop 8, which is titled regulates the amount outpatient kidney dialysis clinics charge for dialysis treatment?
Yeah, so this was when I had to do some research on myself because I'm not actively involved in the dialysis world. You can see a lot of ads against it on Facebook, which is always a red flag when you see a lot of ads against something that are sponsored heavily. So I went into my research, and it's supported by the Federation of Labor, and it's geared towards mitigating or controlling the costs that dialysis patients have to pay for their dialysis services. So because labor supports it and because it's there to make medication more accessible, I am a yes on Prop 8.
Now, this is a segue to my next question, but did you know that dialysis is the only form of healthcare in the United States that has universal coverage?
No.
Absolute 100% government funding for as much dialysis as you ever need in your entire lifetime. It is the only piece of universal health care in our government. And do you know which president enacted that?
Just gonna go with Johnson.
Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon enacted the only form of universal health care in the United States other than like what government employees have.
Did he have someone in his life that had to get dialysis? Because that's the only reason I would imagine Nixon would do something like that.
I mean, that's why Dick Cheney's for gay marriage. But as a follow-up to that question, I'm not sure about that. But yeah, he enacted universal coverage for dialysis. And it's interesting. I'm actually for Prop 8 because of the fact that these are very privately run, for-profit institutions that have a lot of problems. I've had friends on dialysis where they kind of march you in like cattle and they want to get in as many people as possible.
It's like chemotherapy.
And they get paid 100% of whatever price they ask because there's universal coverage. It's like you hear about Medicare fraud. They don't even have to worry about that because the government just signs the check. Like they just name the price and it goes through.
Yeah.
So I would love to see some regulation on that. I also don't want to see patients suffer. So I hope that they regulate it on the other side. If they say that they're going to have to close clinics. That means they're not going to make the profit they want. It's the same argument against the Measure M. If they don't make the profit they want, they'll take away units from the marketplace. Mm-hmm. It's the same ransom note argument. Now, we don't live in a perfect capitalist state, and we also don't live in a perfect socialist state. And through my economics class, I asked a professor here when I was a student, as a transfer student a couple years ago, if a country like Somalia is perfect capitalism because of the sense that if you make money, you get to keep it. There's no taxes. But if someone wants to steal it from you, they can. And he's like, that's more of a failed state. So basically, once you get towards perfect capitalism, you get towards a failed state. On the other hand, when you get towards perfect communism, meaning everything is public property, you end up with a dictatorship usually because they can literally say, hey, your purple Build Community shirt is needed for the cause today. You don't get your shirt. Mm-hmm. What parts of our government would you like to see move more towards socialism? And if any, would you like to see move towards more private choice in the way that they are profited from or operated?
Totally. The term perfect capitalism made my brain like backfire because I was like, there's no such thing as perfect capitalism.
It's not a qualitative thing. It's
right.
More of a degrees type of a thing.
So healthcare and education are the first two that come to mind immediately around socialization of access to stuff. It's interesting, though, because a lot of people are super afraid of socialism, but then our taxes that provide services and do stuff it's like socialism. You're paying into the pot to help other people that may not have access to it.
Adding to my contest about the word "and," I also dare anyone to document their trip across the United States driving only on private roads that they have permission to use.
Right.
And that's where I get off the boat with people that are afraid of the word socialism completely, is if you can drive across the country on private roads that you have permission to use, then you can say you're against socialism completely.
Right. And there was another thing I saw recently that, people are willing to let their employer take 20% of their paycheck out to cover their medical insurance, but don't want for that to stop and have the government take out a portion of their payment to be able to offer universal health care to everyone. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But if I had to choose two right off the bat, it would be education and health care for sure.
And if communities in California, New York, Connecticut, Seattle, all these places, it's not just Santa Cruz having this housing crunch. And it's not only people here having that conversation. A lot of people like to say, oh, it's because Santa Cruz is beautiful and it's just going to be expensive to live. It already is. It's already 4 to 5 times as expensive as the average across the country. And this is happening in every economic center across the country. If we don't have rent control, I see two choices. Increase traffic with service workers driving in from other communities, or people sleeping in their cars like they do in the Bay Area right outside city limits.
Which is already happening in Santa Cruz. Both of those are already happening in Santa Cruz. And just with that topic of, what was the question about?
Well, but about socialism and capitalism, I feel like housing should somewhere come in between, where if you've come across some money or your family has money and you want a sweet house, go for it. But how do you enact socialist attitudes towards the issue of housing without everyone living in cinder block gray buildings?
Right. There's the opportunity to effectively tax the people in the higher income levels of the community, as well as people that come in, speculate a property, flip it really quickly, and then make a ginormous profit off of the community itself just to move on and take the money outside of the area. So increasing taxes in vacation rentals, increasing taxes in speculation tax and transfer taxes. Like Goldman Sachs just bought the Overlook Apartments, which is now called the Hilltop, over on Western Drive. $50 million they came in and bought that for. So if there was even a small amount of real estate transfer tax that was applied to that purchase, that would have been millions of dollars potentially generated for the city that could have been used for affordable housing development.
What do you know about Blackstone Investments?
The name scares me. I know that they own a lot of property. It reminds me of Black Water from the mercenary group. But
Eric Prince?
Yeah. So any large-scale investment or property management companies coming into Santa Cruz and buying up lots of property is problematic in my perspective.
Now, they own a lot of property, notably in L.A.
Mm-hmm.
They own 127,000 homes. I don't know if they own a lot. I'm not speaking specifically to Santa Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
But that type of thing is happening where after the housing crunch in 2008, when a lot of people either got into mortgages stupidly that they couldn't afford except in bright days, or they got tricked into it. I'm not saying they were all, they're not bad people. A lot of people didn't have the capacity to understand what an adjustable mortgage does when the economy goes down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so then instead of rents going down during the recession, they went up because homeowners all of a sudden were competing for rentals because they'd just been booted out of their homes and they have a big debt ticket from their house that they weren't able to pay off. And how do you see the way out of that mess when then tenants are turned against each other and no one gets to look at the banks that are profiting from the whole situation? And then there's literally, I don't want to fight with landlords that are also paying double for their house to the bank.
I'm a big proponent of a state bank. I don't know why California hasn't done it yet, but it's something that we should be continuously pushing forward towards, like North Dakota did, where they enacted a state bank where all of the money that goes through the state comes through the state bank instead of there being large banks like Chase and Wells Fargo handling the majority of the loans that are taking place. Because if the state owns the money and they're not focused on generating a profit off of the loans that they're making to be able to spur and increase or incentivize housing development, then we can have low to no interest loans that are being offered in places. And even locally in Santa Cruz, there's a group called Santa Cruz Community Ventures that's advocating for cooperative development of housing and the maintaining the equity in the community instead of it going out into banks and other kinds of things that way. And the city can do it, as well as partnering with the community foundation and figuring out ways that their endowments can work to provide that pool of money for low income affordable housing development in the area, and do it in a way that's aesthetically pleasing, like you mentioned before. There's great opportunities to look at places outside of the country, like Vienna, Austria, that has social housing. They do car-free housing. They do it with ample green space. They do it with childcare incorporations. They do it with bike shops, as opposed to parking spaces. So there's options all around the world for us to be able to look to. But the first thing is a radical revolution of values, as Dr. King put it, and starting to put the conversation of people over profit as opposed to what it's been for so long, which is profit over people. And just because I know we're running out of time, just to address a couple more things with Measure M, because there's a lot of misinformation flying around about...
Oh, was that banner on the Broadway house real?
The one about how many people could live in there and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff? No, and you notice how it disappeared? So
No. I mean, but was it a real banner that was hung on the house?
there was a real banner hung on
Okay,
the
it
house that
wasn't
said
just a
that.
picture online.
No, no, it
I
was
was
a
out of
real
town
one.
when I saw it, and I wasn't sure if someone had doctored that photo.
No, there's another
So
one
that
of the
photo,
same.
That banner had the Santa Cruz City official logo on it, and it said that 40 people could live in a 3-bedroom house with all their cars. I can't even get a parking permit without showing my registration and my rental agreement, and I've lived there for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
How does the city feel, and what are the legalities around using a city official logo on a biased and also untrue
Right.
campaign ad?
Yeah, so I can't speak for the city or how they're feeling around it, but definitely says a lot to the gall that the opposition has in making the claims that they do. And something just to address really quick is that one of the arguments that comes up a lot of the time is that if we enact rent control, then we'll lose units. And they always look to Berkeley as this holy study that proves that they'll lose available units. But from the research done by No Place Like Home and looking at the data that they apply that to, while it's true that in the 1980s and 1990s, while rent control was enacted, Berkeley lost 3,100 units, or approximately 26% of their total stock of rental units. But that's not because of rent control. And you can see that because in Alameda County and in the 9-county Bay Area surrounding area, they lost almost twice the amount of available rentals, and those were not impacted by rent control. So the arguments don't make any sense. The propaganda machine is on full force, and they've received over $700,000 from predominantly outside moneyed interests like apartment associations. There's lots of stuff, so people need to do their research. Go on, check it out. Feel free to hit me up if you have any more questions, because there's a lot of truth behind all the lies.
All right, we got to go. This has been Unquestionable. I'm Dan Wu, city council candidate Drew Glover. If you're a candidate or you know a candidate that wants to be on in the next couple weeks, hit me up at Daniel Wootan, Wootan on Facebook, or dan.woop as in person at gmail.com. My forever vandalized email address that I love. Never leave yourself logged in a journalism class. Have a great day, guys. I'll take this call off the air. You just missed it.